Prepare yourself, because what looks like a construction project in Florida is actually something far bigger, a strategic power move designed to lock American dominance into the next era of space. SpaceX is planning to invest at least $1.8 billion on Florida's Space Coast, and according to Reuters, that money is aimed at expanding Starship launch and processing capabilities in a way that could transform the United States from the current leader in launch operations into the undisputed industrial superpower of the space age. This is not just about building infrastructure, this is about building the physical backbone of a national space empire right at the Atlantic edge of America, in the same state that once launched Apollo to the moon and now appears ready to launch the next American leap beyond it. And the deeper message is impossible to miss. The United States is not preparing to participate in the next space race, it is preparing to overwhelm it. The first clue is the scale of the investment itself. Reuters reported that SpaceX's Florida expansion centers on new Starship launchpads in related processing facilities, with the company also saying the project could create around 600 full-time jobs by 2030. But the more revealing detail is not just the dollar amount, it is where the money is going. This build-out is happening on the Space Coast, the most symbolically charged and operationally important launch corridor in the country. This is where the United States already projects power into orbit, where military launches, commercial launches, astronaut missions, and national prestige all converge. According to the U.S. Space Force, Space Launch Delta 45 enabled 93 launches from the Eastern Range in 2024, making it the world's busiest spaceport. So when SpaceX pours $1.8 billion into Florida, it is not choosing a random site, it is reinforcing the single most powerful launch geography on Earth. Then comes the industrial centerpiece, the Florida Gigabay. According to SpaceX, this structure will stand 380 feet tall, contain roughly 815,000 square feet of workspace, and provide about 46.5 million cubic feet of interior processing space. SpaceX says it will support Starship and Super Heavy vehicles up to 266 feet tall, include 24 work cells for integration and refurbishment, and use cranes capable of lifting up to 400 US tons. That is not a warehouse, that is an assembly cathedral for a new American space fleet. It signals a move away from experimental rhythm and toward industrial repetition. The point is no longer just to test Starship. The point is to manufacture, stack, refurbish, and relaunch at a tempo that competitors cannot easily match. Mass production has always been America's strategic secret weapon, from World War II factories to the digital age. Now, that same industrial logic is being pointed upward toward orbit and the moon. And this is where the plan becomes unmistakable. SpaceX is not setting up one Florida Starship gateway, it is building toward two. Reuters reported that one Starship launch site is being developed at Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, while another is planned at Space Launch Complex 37 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. That matters because redundancy is power. One pad can be delayed, two pads can create resilience. One site is a program, two sites are an architecture, and the locations are packed with American symbolism. LC-39A is historic ground, the same complex associated with Apollo and later adapted for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. SLC-37 sits inside an active military-linked launch environment that connects civil and strategic capability. Put those together, and this stops looking like expansion and starts looking like a national launch grid for the most powerful rocket system ever attempted. The launch cadence being contemplated tells you exactly how serious this is. The FAA's final decision framework for LC-39A allows for up to 44 Starship Super Heavy launches per year from that site. Meanwhile, the Department of the Air Force's final environmental review for SLC-37 analyzed a concept that could support up to 76 Starship launches annually there. Even before you add those numbers together, you can see the shape of the future, a launch tempo measured not in occasional spectacles, but in sustained strategic throughput. That is how dominance works in aerospace. It is not just about one rocket being bigger or louder, it is about who can launch more often, recover faster, process more payload, move more mass, and build a rhythm so relentless that the competition is always reacting.
Florida is being prepared not merely as a spaceport, but as a launch engine for American permanence in orbit and beyond. And all of this ties directly into the moon. According to NASA, SpaceX's human landing system is a core part of the Artemis architecture, and NASA's 2021 award to SpaceX for the Lunar lander had a total contract value of $2.89 billion. NASA says the human landing system is the transportation that will take astronauts to the lunar surface as part of Artemis. In other words, this build-out in Florida is not separate from America's lunar return. It is one of the engines that could make it possible. Reuters reported today that after the successful Artemis 2 mission, NASA is now focused on proving commercial lunar landers from SpaceX and Blue Origin, with the agency aiming to put astronauts back on the moon by 2028. So this is not abstract ambition. This infrastructure in Florida is part of the race to ensure that when Americans step on the lunar surface again, they do it backed by a reusable, scalable, commercially integrated system made in the United States.
And timing matters. The United States is not acting in a vacuum. Reuters reported that China is openly pursuing a crewed lunar landing by 2030, while also advancing hardware such as the Long March 10 rocket, the Mengzhou spacecraft, and the Lanyu lunar lander. Reuters has also reported that China and Russia are aligned behind the International Lunar Research Station concept, a rival framework to the US-led Artemis system. At the same time, Reuters reported last week that Russia has pushed several lunar missions back to the 2032 to 2036 period, underscoring how uneven the competitive field has become. That means Washington's strongest immediate rival is not Moscow, but Beijing. And that is exactly why the SpaceX investment in Florida matters so much. It is not just commercial expansion, it is an acceleration move in a geopolitical contest that will shape who writes the rules, who controls the transportation lanes, and who turns lunar access into long-term strategic leverage. There is another layer to this story that should make Americans pay attention. Diplomacy follows capability. NASA says the Artemis Accords now have more than 60 signatories, and NASA's dedicated Accords page says Oman became the 61st nation to sign in January 2026. That means the United States is not just competing with rockets, it is building a coalition. In the modern space race, the nation that provides the transportation system often shapes the legal norms, the partnerships, the operational standards, and the political center of gravity. If SpaceX gives America the highest launch tempo, the most reusable heavy-lift system, and the industrial capacity to sustain lunar operations, then every allied nation looking for a path into deep space has a reason to align with Washington's framework rather than a rival system backed by Beijing and Moscow. Launchpads become influence, factories become diplomacy, hardware becomes order. And Florida is the perfect stage for that power. NASA's state economic impact figures show that in Florida, NASA activity supports 35,685 jobs and $8.2 billion in economic output, while the Moon to Mars campaign alone supports 13,123 jobs and $3 billion in economic output. This means the Space Coast is not merely nostalgic ground from America's Apollo past, it is already a high-value node in the national industrial base. So when SpaceX adds a Gigabay, 2 Starship launch sites, and a multi-billion-dollar expansion to that ecosystem, the result is not just more launches, it is a thicker American aerospace cluster, deeper supply chains, more engineering gravity, and a stronger national capacity to outbuild competitors over time. America does not stay ahead by talking about greatness, it stays ahead by concentrating talent, capital, infrastructure, and execution in places where momentum compounds. Florida is becoming exactly that kind of fortress. What makes this even more powerful is that SpaceX already operates from a position of extraordinary momentum. Reuters reported this month that SpaceX's revenue increased to $13.1 billion in 2024, while another Reuters report noted the company achieved an unmatched launch cadence approaching 1 rocket every 2 days. That matters because Starship is not being developed by a fragile startup begging for relevance. It is being built by the company that already dominates launch execution and uses that operational machine to fund its next leap. So when a company with that kind of tempo plants 2 future Starship gateways on Florida's coast, it sends a message to every rival nation and every rival aerospace firm.
the United States is not pausing after winning the current launch market. It is using that victory as the cash flow and confidence base for the next, much larger arena. And maybe that is the most important point of all. Americans should see this for what it is, a visible sign of national ambition returning to full strength. The same country that once launched Saturn V from Florida now appears ready to turn Florida into the operational heart of a reusable super heavy launch network. The same nation that put men on the moon first is now rebuilding the industrial muscle to do more than just return. It wants to stay. According to Reuters, NASA's Artemis push now unfolds under the pressure of Chinese lunar ambitions, and that pressure may be exactly what sharpens American execution. Competition has always awakened something powerful in the United States, not fear, but focus. And in that sense, this $1.8 billion SpaceX move is bigger than a company expansion. It is a signal flare announcing that America intends to remain the lead civilization of the space age. So the hidden plan is no longer hidden. It is steel, concrete, cranes, launch towers, work cells, and cadence. It is the conversion of Florida into a launch corridor built not only for spectacular missions, but for strategic saturation. It is the fusion of commercial speed, national ambition, lunar logistics, and geopolitical intent. And if this build-out reaches the scale now being outlined by SpaceX, the FAA, NASA, and the Space Force, then what we are really looking at is the foundation of a new American space order, one in which the United States can launch more, build faster, return to the moon stronger, and stand clearly ahead of China and far beyond a delayed Russia. That is why it matters, not because $1.8 billion is a large number, but because it may prove to be the price of locking in the next great chapter of American supremacy above the Earth itself, and that chapter may already be under construction on the coast of Florida. If you believe America should lead the next frontier the way it led the last one, leave your take in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and tell me which US megaproject you want us to break down next.